All right. Well, we are kicking off the second live stream. I'm very, very excited about today's guest. Neal Tovsen, welcome to the live stream. How are you this fine morning? Morning for us.
Fantastic, fantastic. It's a beautiful, sunny, warm day in Minneapolis.
I'm going to laugh about that a little bit. And for anyone who is listening, we are chuckling a little because I used to live in Minnesota and he said it's a beautiful, warm 28 degrees Fahrenheit there. And meanwhile, I'm over here in Texas, like it's going to be 78 today. I'm going to work outside this afternoon. Oh, how the weather is different.
Yep, yeah, a little bit different perspective on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am so excited to have you today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Obviously, from Minnesota. We'll get into kind of like what you do and how you build, but just generally, sort of like what you've been up to and who are you?
Sure, sure. So I started my career years ago in large enterprise. Companies like GE and Siemens and PricewaterhouseCoopers, stuff like that. And I kind of got this sort of itch to do my own thing. And so I've founded two startups, and then got to a point where I couldn't really sustain that after 6 years and wanted to start a family. So I kind of like out of necessity, and before the word fractional, like it was hard to explain what I did, but I kind of stumbled into this sort of fractional CTO sort of thing. And I've been doing that. I did that full time for about 5 years and getting back into it now after a little sabbatical. So I love working with startups. I love working with non-technical founders. I love coaching technical founders that maybe are new to the startup world, or maybe my first client was actually a technical co-founder, but they were fresh out of school, and so they had a brilliant idea. They managed to raise money very quickly, had a big first customer right away, and said, "Oh gosh, now what do we do?" And so it was kind of more of a coaching, player coach sort of scenario there. But yeah, generally speaking, people who can't afford, or don't need a full-time technical co-founder.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. We nerded out on this a little bit before we actually started the live stream, but I think that's something that's really needed right now. And honestly, there's a lot of fractional types of roles, and not to go on a tangent too much, but I started doing fractional DevRel earlier in the year as I was starting to build my business. I thought maybe that was the thing I wanted to chase down. Turns out I don't by any means, but I had to explain what fractional meant. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So I do agree that it's not as known. Do you want to maybe give folks a good idea? I think you sort of did in your description, but maybe just let them know what fractional means to you.
I think the hardest thing for me, 10 years ago when I started doing this kind of work, was trying to explain to people the difference between like a consultant and a fractional, right? A fractional is just simply not full time. That's all it means, really.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
So
yeah.
if I'm the CTO, I'm the CTO. It just might be working for multiple companies because they're part time, right?
Yep.
And I think that's the key difference is that I'm part of your team. I'm there with you in the trenches. I'm not a consultant. I'm not, whatever. I do coaching engagements, which is more consulting sort of stuff too, for high performing software engineering and product development. What do we build? How do we build it? How do we operate it? Sort of stuff. But the fractional side of things, if it's a fractional gig, like I'm part of the team until such time as either I hire my full-time replacement or you don't need me anymore. But it's basically an employee sort of arrangement. Not just some sort of arm's length consulting sort of thing.
Right. Yep. I agree. Which is why I didn't want to do it.
Yep.
It's for, there's everything, everyone has their different roles. I think in a CTO space, I could see it would be really, really great opportunity. In a DevRel space, which already has a lot of sort of who's talking to who, is product talking to marketing, is marketing talking to sales? Do they know what's happening with DevRel and developer relations? And that's already sort of a political nightmare. And to come in part-time and try to chase down that nightmare is not as fun. But I think, in a CTO realm, I could see where that'd be a really beautiful, rewarding role.
Yeah. Like I said, it's really just about I love rolling up my sleeves and being part of the team, and I love earlier stage companies because you get to play so many hats. You get to get involved in the business, which I kind of believe that every software engineer, you're with every line of code you write, you're placing bets on behalf of the business, and if you aren't like fully in tune with what the business is doing, even as a junior dev, like as much as you can, learn about what the business is doing. And when I'm working with CEOs and senior leaders, like my advice to them is just spew your thoughts. Like help the team understand how you think. Help the team understand, what do you want to be when you grow up? What is this company going to do? How do we approach all this stuff? Because the way that you're thinking about it influences the code people write, you know?
Yep.
And so if you're working, you know, like I said, even as a junior dev, the more you can understand about where we're going and why,
Yep.
the better code you're going to write. You're going to make better decisions, you know?
Yep, and you're gonna be more invested, right? I don't know about you, but for me, like, when I hear someone's vision and it's like, "Okay, I'm thinking about this today, but here's where I'm going in 5 years or 2 years," or whatever it looks like, I get excited. Like, if I'm invested and I care about it, I get excited and I'm like, "Okay, you tell me how to get you there," right? Like, "How do we do this together?" So I fully agree, and I think I was just at a conference, last week, which we were talking about how you had watched yesterday's live stream, so you heard about this, of
Mhm.
actually a dev who was really like, I really think we're making bad decisions. And it was one of
Mm.
those scenarios. It's like, I don't think that enough developers find their way into those business conversations or are exposed to those business conversations to really start to understand that and apply that and bring that into their day to day, which I think is a missed opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, my favorite scenario, which is exactly kind of what you're talking about, is like you've got the typical situation, right, where you know you've got a CEO or a product leader or something like that who's like, oh, we got to go faster, we got to da, 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 da.
Yep.
And the software engineers are like, oh, but I have to make it perfect, I have to make it really good, I have to spend extra time, and it's like the answer is probably somewhere in between.
Yep.
But if everybody's invested in where we're going and why, then those conversations get a lot easier because the conversation becomes not about making this perfect software that's beautiful and that we like to look at 6 months from now, which almost never happens no matter how hard you try, really, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but it becomes, where are we going and why, and what's the best way to approach that? And so,
Yep.
you know what? One of the things that I don't think I ever figured out until I started my own business and start like, oh, that's why this matters, right? Is like, when do you take shortcuts, right? I'm
Yes.
such a technical
Yes.
perfectionist that
Yes.
I couldn't let myself take shortcuts. And I think early in my career, my managers got really frustrated at me for that, right? Because I wanted
Yes.
to make it perfect. And they're like, no, just get it done. And I never understood, because I didn't want to deal with that 2 years from now or whatever. And the
Yep.
reality is, if the company doesn't survive for 2 years, it does not matter what you have to deal with in 2 years, right? So
Yes.
that was something, one of those, like, I wish somebody had taught me as a junior dev, or figured out how to get through my thick skull
Yes.
as a junior dev, of like why sometimes it's okay. And even like if you come into a scenario, you know, nerds, our favorite thing is to walk into the room and look at the code and be like, well, I didn't write it, so that's crap, right? And it's like, the reality
So
is
judgy.
that code that code got us where we are, right?
Mhm.
And if, you know, so many businesses just don't survive, you
Yep.
know. My first startup, total failure. I went 3 years, I learned a ton, but that code's gone, right? Nobody's going to see that code again ever, and
Yep.
it doesn't matter how perfect it was, the business didn't survive. So if you're not making choices that are
Ooh.
based on what the business needs right now, even
Yep.
if that means taking ugly, hacky shortcuts sometimes, intentionally understanding the impact, right, placing the bet, then it doesn't matter.
Yep. Oh my gosh, what you said, I was just over here like, "Yes, yes," which you can obviously tell, but I, started my business back in, April, so it's been, I don't know, however long that's been. It's been a hot minute. I have that problem. I have the I need to reach perfection problem, and I couldn't figure out, and I've struggled with it my entire life as a dev also. I couldn't figure out, I'm like, "Oh, I just feel like I'm delivering such greatness," and my coach was like, "Hey, I get it, but, you're probably delivering too much, right? Like, they're looking for, 'Hey, I need insights on this event that's coming up,' and they maybe want something that's a quick turnaround, right? Here's how you approach it. Here's who you go talk to. Here's your whole focus. Here's the goal, right? Here's what you're going after." And instead, I'm like, "Here's a 10-page strategy doc on how you're gonna go to this event and how you're gonna show up and who you should talk to and why." And it's like, they don't need all that, right? And I think as a dev, I constantly did the same thing. I was like, everything had to be perfect. It had to be
Mm.
pixel perfect, like literally pixel perfect, because I was more on the front end side. Um, And it took longer, it took more time, but I felt better about that, and I think that that's great and all, but like you said, sometimes businesses don't survive, and sometimes you need all those strategic insights to be able to say, "Hey, I have this ticket. I know that this is something that's sort of small. This isn't necessarily a priority for us in the future. This is sort of a maybe it's a patch, right? Whatever the situation is." To be able to say, "Hey, you know what? I can put my 75% in, my 80% in, right? It doesn't have to be at 100."
I would almost recharacterize that. It's not as though you're not putting 100% in. It's what you're
Mm.
optimizing for, right? I
That's even
always put
better.
in 100%, right? I'm always super passionate about what we're doing, right?
Yep.
But what am I optimizing for? Am I optimizing for speed? Am I optimizing for quality? Am I optimizing for UX? Am I optimizing for,
Mhm.
what is that, right?
Yep.
And that's the conversation. And so it's not about phoning it in. It's not about being. You can still be a perfectionist. This is kind of how I solve the puzzle in my brain, right? I'm a
Ooh.
perfectionist.
Yep.
I changed the definition of perfection to match the need at the time.
That's
That's all
smart.
it is, right?
Yes.
So, and I still have trouble with it. I still I just can't let it go. And every now and then somebody will be like, dude, just commit. Like, okay, all right. You know,
Just commit.
that happened yesterday actually. But like, that's still a thing.
Yep.
But yeah, you have to change the definition of the objective. And again, that's why the business context matters, because that helps
Yes.
you as your, super anal perfectionist engineer mind square away the fact that I'm going to hack this and ship it, right?
Yep. Yep.
Because I'm shooting for perfection of a business. I want to get that next round of
Mm.
funding. I need to get to that release. I need to, because I understand why that's important, right?
I love that angle even more. You're still contributing your 100%. You're still feeling like you're reaching that perfectionist level that you want to be at, but you're focusing that energy in the right direction.
Exactly. And like I
Mm.
said, it didn't get through my skull until I actually owned my own business. But if
Same.
there's like a way for other people to like somehow, grok that in a way that doesn't require you to, take all your life savings and put it in a trash can and light it on fire, then you'll be ahead of me.
We are so relatable right now. All right, digressing from our dumpster fires, which are
Sure.
all great
Yeah.
lessons for everyone to learn, right? Um, we talked about, what you do. Do you have an official title or company? Do you work for yourself? One of my questions
Yeah,
is normally like,
independent, yeah, and yeah, just fractional CTO and product development coach. Mhm.
love it. Well, we talked about earlier before we got on the live stream that you got to spend the last 6 months remodeling your house, which is a nice
Mhm.
little break. So with that, what are you diving into these days? What are you
Yeah, so I'm
building?
working on I'm actually back working in a Ruby on Rails project with a
Ooh,
client that I've worked with off and on for 10 years, and
love
it's
that.
really really awesome. I've worked in a lot of different languages and a lot of different frameworks, and they all they're all tools. They were all built by somebody to solve a problem, and so they
Right.
all have utility, and it's all different ways. But I got to say, Ruby as a language is so elegant. Rails is so, I love the idea of opinionated software. And I think
Mm.
Rails has done that as well or better than anybody else. And so is it the right tool for every job? Absolutely not. But I love it when I get to play with it.
Yeah. What do you feel like is the so I don't have as much exposure to, Ruby and Ruby on Rails generally.
Mhm.
I know many devs who build with it, and the ones that do just love it. And they
Yeah.
are like, they swear by it. And
Mhm.
so I haven't had the chance to actually sit down and be like, why? Why do you swear by it? So tell me, like, what is it about sort of that stack that really just you feel like is so powerful, but more so, where do you feel like it plays the best role in what you're building? Because, like you had said, it's not the job, the tool, it's
Yeah.
not the tool for everything.
Honestly, the way that I think about it in my mind is that there's a dichotomy between Ruby the language and Rails the framework.
Mm,
So Ruby itself is like it's people compare it to Lisp, things like that. It's like this crazy expressive language, right? I feel like, and that's a double-edged sword a little bit. On one hand, I could probably take an RB file and I could hand it to my grandmother, and she could probably read it and have a clue about what it does, because a
Ooh.
good Ruby developer, it almost looks like natural language. Like Ruby
Mm.
itself, that you don't need any, people talk about creating DSLs for certain domain specific languages, things like that. Ruby
Yep.
just is that, right? You don't need that, because the
Interesting.
language itself is so expressive. On the flip side, when you're first starting out, I remember when I first started it, I found it was very hard to write because it's literally a blank page. Like it is so expressive that it's hard to understand.
Mm.
So Ruby itself has this crazy capability that's a little bit hard to wrap your brain around. And then you throw Rails on top of it, which is your web framework for, APIs and web pages and database access and all this other stuff. And that's all crazy opinionated about how you do things, which is what saves your butt from Ruby's like
Ooh.
openness. Like it's
Yeah.
so hard to figure out what to do with Ruby sometimes because it's so expressive. Rails
Hmm.
says, do it this way. And
Okay. I love
that
that.
tension is
Yep.
amazing, is amazing. And then the other piece about Ruby that's really interesting is that Ruby, being an interpreted language, has the ability to do things with like a lot of the best libraries and stuff. Active Record is their ORM, for example. Like you can have a class that is just class user, and that's the entire class. And if you go define the rows in the columns in the database table at runtime, it has all the getters and setters for all those attributes automatically, as well as all the persistence methods and all that other stuff. So Ruby has this
Interesting.
ability to actually take a class and modify it at runtime, and that's a lot of how Rails works, which
Hmm.
gives Rails a whole bunch of crazy capabilities that when I first started doing it, coming
Yep.
from languages like Java and .NET, things like that, I
Yep.
thought was insane and dangerous. And but again, the Rails community is so opinionated on exactly how you use that power that that's how it works. So it
Ooh.
doesn't have a lot of safety nets in the language, but the
Yep.
community has built these crazy strong conventions that are really powerful. And it's a very different way of approaching problems
Hmm.
from, say, Java, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and it has pros and cons.
Right.
But man, when it works, it's beautiful. Like it's generally easier to if you have a experienced Ruby dev to show up on a new project and be productive the first day. I've personally done that. I've seen it. I've hired people who've done that. It's there. The conventions are so strong in that community that
Mm.
you can be productive almost immediately. Like walking into a Rails app is walking into any Rails app, by and large, right? And
Dang.
then you kind of get into my next favorite catchphrase, which is, I love tools that make easy things easy and make hard things possible. And I think Rails fits that well. Easy things are easy, hard things are possible, right?
Oh, that's great. Okay, so follow up to that. I'm so excited about Ruby, honestly. I'm like, hmm. So I have a future guest in a couple weeks coming on. His name is Brian Castle, and
Mm.
he just launched this. Do you know who that is?
I know the
There's
name, yeah. Mhm.
Okay, so he I don't know when he launched it. I met him at an event many years ago and have known him for a number of years, but he has like an app in a month kind of a vibe service where he's offering. And it's like he'll come in and it's like on a weekly basis he's contributing to the SaaS product that you want to try to build out, right? Can you get to where you want your app to be? And I just thought it was so interesting. And now that you told me about Ruby and like Rails and how they come together and the power there makes tons of sense because that's what he's using. And that's what he just thinks that it is awesome. And he's not a dev by trade. He actually came in from sort of a different industry, but has been in SaaS and building these different things. And so now I'm like, oh, I can't wait to talk to Brian because I think he'll have very similar sentiment, but also have sort of thoughts on what he's building and how that's coming into play. So follow up on that. Where do you think that stack is the most lucrative for building, right? Like when would you choose to use that versus maybe something else?
That's such a hard question.
I
Um,
figured.
well, so I mean, here's the thing. Like, as much as I love it, the reality is that practitioners of Ruby and Rails have been generally, I think, in the decline. And
Mm,
so I think a lot of that has to do with talking with the founder about what they want to be when they grow up. What is the company
yeah.
going to be? and the culture that they want, right? So, um, all of the different languages and frameworks each kind of carry their own culture, which
Yep.
on which on the good side is they bring their own superpowers and they vary by language. On the flip side, they bring their own baggage,
Yep.
right? And so the baggage in the Rails community is that the language does not seem to be growing, which is a bummer. And the practitioners, I would probably say the average Rails practitioner tends to be very, very highly skilled, very
Mm,
passionate about software engineering, and they tend to value productivity. Those are all great things. They also
yeah.
tend to be expensive. They tend to be hard to find,
Mm,
things like that. And so it's
yep.
it's all kind of a question of what's the right tool for what do you want to be. You're placing a bet again.
Yep.
Where do you want to be? JavaScript developers, TypeScript developers are everywhere.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are fantastic. And the tools are so ubiquitous that it's really hard to argue against picking something that has that kind of inertia and momentum, right?
Yep.
So you're making those kinds of conversations. But if you've got a case where you don't mind trying to find those rare, very highly sought after engineers, and you've got a business case that is compelling and interesting to that kind of culture, right?
Yep.
Then maybe that's the right choice for you, because you can build a culture that can innovate quickly and can do a lot of interesting things, that maybe are harder to do, not impossible, but harder to do in other languages.
See, now I'm really turned on by it because that would definitely be what, I'm as I'm sure you can relate to, right? The perfectionist vibe, productivity. I'm trying to be efficient and maximize every day, all day.
Yep.
And so to me, that sounds really, really beautiful. So we actually talked about this topic a little bit before we went live, and we're kind of derailed from the questions that I originally asked. But honestly, that's okay because this is such a great conversation. We talked about how all these different language and different technical stack communities vary in so many ways, and I fully agree. But I'd love to like kind of dive into that a bit, right? You just sort of shared with us what Ruby, the vibes you get from Ruby, which I'm going to go hang out with some Ruby devs. They sound like my people. But a lot of what we get in sort of the JavaScript ecosystem is going to be more of it's just like younger, it's hipper, it's I don't know, they're doing sort of different things, and I'd love to sort of talk through what you think you see and kind of cross that with maybe some of the things that I see as we talk about different languages. So you had mentioned some of the other communities you're a part of. Do you want to start maybe sharing some of those and things you've witnessed?
Yeah, I mean, I spent a huge chunk of my career in Java. I've spent a good chunk in .NET. I've done a lot of JavaScript. I mean, that's kind of almost in some ways the OG, right? I mean, that language goes back to the 90s. And I worked at a Golang shop,
Oh,
at
cool.
Python. So, I've kind of covered a lot of the usual suspects.
Yep.
Um, JavaScript and TypeScript are both, I think they're on such a tear in terms of popularity, in terms of usefulness, in terms of maturity. One of the things that I think is really, really cool over the last few years is JavaScript as a general purpose, especially backend, but even on the front end language, has really started maturing. I think the interesting thing is that JavaScript is still carrying and seems to be still struggling to figure out how to jettison the baggage of being a scripting language from the 90s.
Yeah.
And there's so much baggage that comes with this, all the transpiling, all of the memory issues, the way the event loop works is much better than it used to be. But async await and promises and things like that are concepts that I wasn't part of the working groups that developed those, but they feel to me very much like they were trying to, um, you know, uh, I don't want to say polish a turd, but in the sense like they were trying to take this language that was never designed to do what they wanted to do with it, but
Yep.
because of backward compatibility, because the runtimes are in every browser out there on every computer on the internet, and you can't just go magically snap your fingers and change all that. They had to have all of these backward compatibility features in the language, and so they've tried so hard to grow and develop and mature this language, while doing, have their cake and eat it too. And it's really created a lot of complexity in that space. And
Yeah.
then the other piece is the JavaScript as a community seems very, a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know.
I was trying
Is
to find the word too. It's hard.
is fad driven, fashionable the right term? I'm not sure, but
Trendy.
front end frameworks, I'm so happy that
Yeah.
React is finally kind of becoming almost a de facto standard, because for so long there, the front end frameworks didn't last a handful of years.
That's
And
so true.
so every code base, if you're thinking about it from a business perspective, I mean, technical debt is something every company has to deal with, but can you imagine building a product where in 2 years you're almost guaranteed that all your front end code is obsolete just because JavaScripters decided that Moo wasn't cool anymore, right? Um, you know, eh,
It's
and
really
that's
true.
really frustrating from a business
Yep.
perspective. So I'm really happy to see the TypeScript and JavaScript community finally getting to some level of maturity. There's still, I think, a ways to go to make it truly productive as it could be and as robust as it could be, but it's making a lot of really good strides. I've done a few JavaScript and TypeScript projects over the last 5 years that started feeling a lot better as an engineer,
Mm.
sort of thing.
That's awesome. That's good to hear. How does
Yeah.
that compare obviously to like .NET and Java, right? And then also as you compare Java and .NET individually in
Yeah.
themselves, like what differences do you see?
So Java, I think my experience there, because it's not used by a lot of startups, but I have worked with some larger companies over the last few years and gotten a little experience. I love what Java has been trying to fold in more. Like historically, there was so much boilerplate. It was so highly structured. It was so uh, earlier in the Java days, it was all about, we need to build the most capable mousetrap possible. And so everything was possible, which meant that you needed to know, every possible, configuration option in that, JEE server configuration file and all of that. You had to weed through and create, hundreds of lines of XML in order to get things to run at all. And, so much boilerplate, and it was so painful. And I think over the years, they finally kind of started doing that. You get things like Spring Boot and things like that are, I think, pulling a lot of great ideas from languages like JavaScript and Ruby and stuff like that. And .NET is very similar as well. What I love about what .NET's been doing lately is we're finally getting out of the world. Microsoft, I think, really suffered from coming up in a world where commercial software was all there was.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yep.
so for so long, the Microsoft community, the .NET community, like if it didn't come from Microsoft, or if you weren't paying tens of thousands of dollars a year for a license, then it was crap.
Yep.
And that has taken literally like a decade plus to evolve. But the current CEO of Microsoft is much more into the open source game. You got things like VS Code, which are pretty amazing. So I think that's all been shifting. You're starting to see more acknowledgement and widespread adoption of true open source projects in the .NET world. I've been talking with a company the past couple of weeks here that is a .NET startup, and so I'm kind of excited about getting my feet wet again in that world, because I'm a little bit rusty. But it's pretty. I think that's shifting quite a bit. It's really interesting. I've always loved Microsoft's developer tools. Their IDEs were fantastic. I started my career in Visual Basic, and I remember going to some of the earlier Java things like that, and I'd be like, well, where's the step through debugger? And everybody would look at me like I had 3 heads. I mean, that's how far back this stuff goes, right? And now it's like one of those things that nobody lives without. But Microsoft was doing that in C++ and VB way back.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So when I first started getting into coding, it was like back in like, oh, I want to say like 2007, at least professionally, right? I did it as a high schooler. I was building random stuff, trying to figure out how I can learn. I feel like a lot of us, right? And as nerds, we are always sort of diving into those types of things. But it's interesting when I first came into the ecosystem and have been working and like understanding, and I had a great conversation about this, is like understanding the system at which you're building with. And I think a long time ago, like earlier, like what you're referring to, right? I didn't quite hit it, but it's like in that sort of vein of earlier days of software development, it was just easier. It was easier, but it was harder, right? It was harder because you were building more. It was more complex. There was more things to manage, more things to think about. But at the same time, like I was, so this is gonna like air my dev chops. The other day I was like, okay, I'm gonna make a Next.js site, and I was like pulling stuff together. And I've been a leader for like 5 years, and it hasn't been on a CTO level, so I haven't been necessarily in a whole lot of code. I've just been more in technological conversations, and I just like couldn't even troubleshoot stuff. And I'm like, just bring me back to my PHP stack where I'm like, I understand how SQL works, I understand how everything works, and like I know my system. Where in these newer technologies, they're beautiful. It saves me so much time. I had a website up in hours, right? But then I also feel like I feel more imposter syndrome that I don't understand everything that's going on. And I think for me, it was just a great conversation. And you talking about all of this really sheds light on that too, of looking at sort of JavaScript compared to some of these other languages, and how that just this lack of system understanding, I think, is something that's a pain when you're looking in sort of the JavaScript ecosystems in comparison to others. I don't know if you feel or resonate with that, but
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, right? But like, there's so many pros and cons to the whole thing. So my degree is I called it technology and communication, as in I actually invented that title. I actually mashed up a computer science minor and a communications minor, and
ooh,
because I was really interested. So we're in the Wayback Machine now. Like Netscape was brand new, right? The World Wide Web was something most people hadn't used yet, right? I'm old, but like I love the idea that technology serves a purpose to humanity. Like this is something that changes the way we live,
yep,
right? And like one of my absolute best friends in the entire world is the kind of guy who you can, he likes, shove him in a closet, give him a hard project, and once a month you open the door, rainbows and unicorns come out, you shove in pizza and Mountain Dew, and you shut the door as quick as you can because he melts in sunlight, right? Like he loves the tech for the tech. And that
yep,
is so cool, right? But that's not me. I'm more interested
yep,
in like, what did you do for people out here, right?
yes,
You need both of those, but like that's where I come from, is this sort of, and that's part of why I gravitate a lot to the business problem, is like, what are we trying to accomplish here? What are we really trying to do for people? And
yep,
so to me, that's such a big piece of the whole puzzle, that it kind of influences a lot of what I do with that. And
yeah,
so when you start talking about, kind of getting back to the question you really asked, like I technically have a computer science related degree,
hmm,
and that's useful. I use bits of that to frame like what's really going on under the covers, and I think that's helpful. And I think that the more that people learn about that stuff, the more it will help their career. It will help them with problem solving. It will help them think about problems in different ways that can be very useful. But on the
yep,
flip side, like I am so excited about the idea that software engineering has really, at least as far as the stuff that I do, B2B SaaS, stuff like that, it's much more like a trade than what I would call pure computer science, which is somebody working
yep,
in algorithms, like not just creating an LLM, but actually like doing the deep, working for OpenAI or Google or something like that, right? That's computer science, right? Or designing processors or whatever, right? What I do
yep,
is really to a trade. And so I love the idea that that's becoming more accessible. I
hmm,
love the idea that I can go hire a boot camp grad, not because they're cheaper, but because they bring life experience from some place that isn't software. They've actually lived in the real world. And when you give them software chops, they are able to sort of synthesize those things. They're able to bring in, you know, uh, uh, you know, information about a problem domain, whether that's finance or customer, dealing with customers, or they were users of the software or whatever. They're not just somebody who's been writing code since they were 5 years old and that's all they do is they know the code. And I think
yep.
that you need both, but they're valuable. It's really interesting for a lot of business problems.
Yeah, I fully agree. Wow, that's actually really there's a lot of little nuggets you just dropped in there. Like a lot. That was really good.
The other
Okay,
favorite
so
out of that,
yeah,
before we get too far, the other thing I love about making it accessible is
yep,
that it's bringing in not just a diversity of thought, but experience and across all the vectors, right? People
yep,
can get into this industry. I think, obviously we're in an industry that is not particularly diverse, and it's moving in the right direction. But I think making the languages, the frameworks, concepts like boot camps more accessible
yep.
is a wonderful sort of shortcut or hack to adding diversity into the industry, so that you don't have to. I mean, my 6-year-old girl is, I'm hoping, going to be a tech nerd when she grows up, but that's 15 years from now, right?
Yep.
Like, that's a generational shift that takes a long time. But if we make the technology more accessible, then we can get there sooner.
Yep, I fully agree. I also fully agree with the ability of taking, bringing someone in who's had a previous career. I came from hospitality and business management,
Mm.
and in that side of things, right? So customer service was something I focused on heavily, right? So shifting into tech, I did it because I started having kids, and I was like, okay, I need to learn to code, and I didn't want to be, I started having kids very young. I was only 20, I think 21, 22. Anyways, and so I didn't want to be out late, right? And so I'm like, how do I learn a different career? I loved to code, loved to dive into things. And I really truly am very thankful for the path that I took, even though I'm like, oh, I could have been a developer sooner. I could have gone to school for it. I could have gotten a comp sci degree. And I'm like, no, because I wouldn't understand and I wouldn't be as capable as I am now, because I was the dev that was like, come into the client meetings, come talk to the client. They want this crazy technical thing. Can you talk them down, right? Talk to them about what they really need, so we can actually come down to like, what are the features that truly need. And I think that's a magical skill that I didn't realize was magical. And I think that I encourage a lot of others to really try to expand on that, on the communications, on the ability to talk through those types of problems with non-nerds, even though we love talking to our nerds.
And it's impossible to be good at all the things, right?
Yep.
But that's why I love diverse teams too, is you've
Yep.
got the person who likes to be shut up in the closet, solve hard problems, right? And then you've got the
Yep.
person you can put in front of a customer and talk them off a ledge, or put in front of
Yeah.
the product owner and be like, say in the nicest way possible that they're crazy, that sort of thing, right? And
I would
like,
love that job.
those are all skills, but they
Yeah.
all sort of revolve around this idea of code and building some software that's useful to somebody. But you need all of those things to have a truly successful team.
Yes, I agree. Okay, so we derailed from all of my questions, which is a-okay. I think I maybe asked you like, the what's your job title, that one. One thing I am really curious, because you are a fractional CTO, working in startups. So if anyone is looking, obviously, great person to reach out to. But I'm curious because two of the questions I ask, and they're more towards the end, and it's just to help devs understand where they should start going to find people like you, or to find resources and learn what you've learned. So two questions. First one, I should say, where do you go when you're stuck? When you're
Mm.
personally stuck in something you can't solve technically or whatever it might be.
Yeah. So ultimately, I think you need an array of different options, right? Because a lot of
Yep.
times nothing, one place doesn't work,
Yep.
and that's shifting obviously with AI and stuff like that. And so I usually I try to get good at solving my own problems before
Mm,
I consume somebody else's time. So of course, you're Googling your Stack Overflow, your GitHub, issues. You're looking for those sorts of things. Now you can throw Copilot, other AI, things like that into. I'm starting to use those more, and I think they're becoming useful.
mhm.
I don't think we're at the the holy grail yet. I don't think our jobs are quite in danger yet, but that
Not
might
yet.
happen.
Yep.
But honestly, you've got to build networks too. If
Yep.
you've got colleagues you're working with, obviously that's your first stop. That's
Yep.
the best place. I've been doing this for 25 years, and yesterday I had to, ask my fellow coder, like, help me. I am so stuck, and pairing up when you need to is just a magical thing. And and you have to sort of get over your own ego, right?
Yep.
When it comes to code reviews, when it comes to pairing up, you have to be able to say, I don't know, I'm stuck. And can I learn something from somebody else? And then obviously, if you're in a super hyper small company where you don't have like a panorama of people that you can talk to, then you got to find another community, right? And so there's some great Slack communities out there. I imagine, I'm not on any of them, but I imagine there's some great Discords and things like that out there for people in whatever stack that you're playing with,
Yep.
that sort of stuff. But I think that's, you got to find ways to solve your problems, right? And that's what this is all about. And figuring out how to connect with people that have similar problems is just the way that we support each other.
I agree. Build your nerd herd around you, right? Who are you going to go to?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so very similar question, somewhat different though. So if you are looking for, let's say you need a new tool or a new solution, or you're building something and you're just like, hey, I know that, maybe you're going to integrate something, you're going to bring something else in. How do you start to search for those things? Like, maybe I'm going to leave it at that. Where would you go to go look for something like that? Similar question, but
That's a tough one for me personally, because I'm usually the one who's, especially in a fractional CTO role, I'm usually not absolutely the most technical person in the room, right? There's almost always somebody else in the room who has ideas for how to solve, right? And so whether that's a particular, SaaS tool or a dev tool or something like that, it's usually not me. And I'm totally cool with that. And I tend to jump around frameworks and languages and stuff enough that I'm not deep enough in any one of them at any given time to be the one with those answers. And so again,
right.
I'm using that same community. I'm still, either talking with the people on my team, or I'm talking with, I'm looking around at I've got some Slack channels that I'm part of and things like that, where I'm always hearing about new things, and I try and pay attention. But there's so much going on out there right now. It's pretty
Tell me
cool.
about it.
Yeah,
Tell
it's
me about it.
it's really cool.
I've been trying to stay up to date and like at least, with it being like my role, right, is like I do competitive analysis and market insights and, developer experience audits of my clients, but then I also compare and contrast them to their competitors. Where do you have that edge? Where do they not? And so I've just been trying to be like, okay, let me just do market research, like just chip away at it every day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the number of tools that are coming out. I'm like, I'm just gonna have to stay with like knowing the hip ones and hope that the new ones just come in as clients so I can learn them that way.
Yeah.
Um, Good follow-up question to what you shared, and I think would be very insightful for our users and anyone listening. You being in the CTO role, I expected that kind of an answer, right? Because oftentimes it's the users, the developers, the ones who are going to be in that tool that want to advocate that up to their leadership and say, hey, we need this.
Mhm.
So what are some of the things that, if a developer on your team really wants to use a tool, like how can they come at you with the strongest argument or sort of representation for you to be like, okay, let's try it.
Bring data, bring a story, right?
Love it.
Data isn't always possible, but can you tell a compelling story about it, about how
Yep.
this is going to make our life better? What problem is it solving? My favorite sort of um, environment in terms of the question you're asking was a company where they had a really, really amazing, it was a little bit larger company. They had a really, really amazing infrastructure engineering and SRE team.
Mhm.
And it was as a leader there, it made it super easy for me, because we could literally have a policy that said any team, I think we had, I don't know, 8 or 10 teams. It was a little bit larger company. Anybody can do anything they want. If your team, wants to go do X stack or language or whatever, you're empowered to do that. However, we have kind of our official, stack, and that if you use that stack, it comes with the observability, the alerting, the monitor,
Hmm.
the canary deploys, the all of the different things, the backups, the disaster recovery, the auditing, all of those things, right? So if
Yep.
you want to diverge from our core stack, you go for it. But you need to solve for all of those requirements
Mm.
There were cases where people did, and it was good because they had a strong need for
Yep.
because of this other problem. This stack was not a great fit, and so they solved for that, and that became another stack that we could support. But
Ooh.
it sort of weeded out that because I think it's cool sort of thing and
Yep.
brought it to a
Yep.
business perspective of, okay, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? And is this the right solution? And this is a case where it's a little bit more of a mature company. Okay, so
Yep.
not always applicable to startups, but I think it provides one healthy way to approach that problem, right?
Yep.
Where we could literally say, if you've got a good idea, let's talk about it, right? Maybe
Mhm.
it does solve a great problem, and we're empowered to go do that. You don't even
Yep.
have to ask for permission, right? But you have to solve for these requirements for the business and sustainability, right? And a lot of times that, if it was sort of a casual, I think Rust is a really cool language, okay, fine. But if you don't solve for all these other things, be like, yeah, I think I'm just going to stick with what we got.
There
And
you go.
and I don't like having people sort of resign to that, like, oh, I guess it's not worth it, whatever. That's not what I'm going for. But what I'm saying
Yep.
is that it opened the possibility to make a business case that we would go forward with, right? And it's okay.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's okay if they decide not to because they've gone through that checklist and they're like, I don't need it this bad, or I don't want it this bad, or it isn't, I don't need to chase down all these other things, right? It
Yep.
isn't necessarily that you're saying, oh, good, you gave up, right? It's more of like, no, you did what you needed to do. Is the
Mhm.
problem worth solving and solving all of these different areas, or can you solve it in a different way?
It put a more objective lens on it, right? And
Yep.
it allowed you to really evaluate the, you know, whatever ROI or whatever terms you want to use there, right? But you can get to a point where you're really talking about, is it worth it? Is it valuable? Is it something we need? And there were cases where it was, right. The analytics team, wanted to use Python, and that wasn't part of our core stack. But that's a crazy, crazy powerful language and stack for analytics, right?
Absolutely.
So it
Yep.
made sense, and they did the work, and it was great, right?
Yep.
Y
I love that. I think that's a beautiful blend of like sort of both ends of the spectrum, right? Of just saying yes to all the things and ending up with technology you're trying to update, like we talked about, right?
Mhm.
JavaScript frameworks changing every few years, not too long ago.
Right, right,
So I think it's a beautiful answer to that versus like go do what you want, right? It's not the wild wild west. We've got
exactly.
some what's the things in bowling? The gutters. Are they what are
Oh,
the things
yeah.
they put? Is that what they call them?
Guardrails?
Yeah, like those little bouncy things. Anyway, I was trying to say that
Oh,
smoothly and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
eloquently, and it didn't come
the
off.
kids use, right?
Yes, yes. I can't think of them.
I
Either
don't remember.
way, we
Oh,
know we're envisioning it. You're stuck
there
in
you
a
go.
lane. You can do what you want in your lane, but you can't leave that lane, which I think is a
You can
really
leave
safe.
the lane if you can do it in a way that's, that meets the objectives, that meets the requirements, right?
Yes, yes, exactly. Okay, I could honestly talk to you for like hours. You are so interesting
Fun.
to talk to. Maybe because you're a fellow Minnesotan, so we've got that Minnesota vibe going on.
Got
But
that connection.
yeah. Where can people find you? Because I think they're going to be intrigued by a lot of what you're sharing. And I think obviously you have this beautiful opportunity where you do fractional CTO and there might be folks looking for your services. So where can folks find you?
Yeah, I need to do some work on my marketing materials, honestly. But LinkedIn is
I can
usually
help you.
the best place to go.
Yeah.
So Neal Tovsen, was it /in/Neal Tovsen, but yeah, that's probably the best place for now. And I'm working on getting better at the marketing stuff.
I literally do marketing for my dev tool clients and my own marketing is complete trash. So
I don't know. Your
I
website looks
fully
pretty
get
good to
it.
me, so.
It's a work in progress. All right. Well, this has been absolutely lovely. So great hearing from you, and so awesome to hear about your journey and everything that you've shared. And I
A
hope
lot of
that
fun.
yeah, I hope that you have a fabulous rest of your day. Give Minnesota a big hug for me.
Will do. Will do. Big cold hug.
Yeah, cold hug. We need those hugs there, right? It's chilly.
Awesome. Thank